Hello, friends. I hope that you have been well. Thank you for joining me this week for another Screencap Redraw, this time featuring the cold but ever so beautiful dog demon Sesshomaru from the series Inuyasha. I shared a few sneak peeks on my Instagram stories, and y'all were super hyped to see him, which made me so happy because I had a lot of fun painting him. If you're new here, hello, my name is Tina, and I like to paint pretty people and characters and ramble on and on and on about them. And basically, I pick a screen cap from a series that I enjoy. So far, it's all been anime, and I recreate it in my own style while having a casual chat about the series and a little bit about my painting process. So feel free to bust out your own sketchbook and sketch and paint along and have me just kind of in the background like a podcast. And like my previous Screencap redraws, I'm using the B paper watercolor sketchbook with watercolors. And of course, I'll have all of the art supplies I'm using listed in the description. Admittedly though, I do apologize about the B paper sketchbook. I purchased a few of them quite a number of months ago for a great price, but for some reason, lately they have been really difficult to come by. I can only imagine that there must be some kind of delay or issues with their manufacturer, which is definitely a bummer because I really do love this paper. I've recently looked at their website and it still lists information from 2019, so I don't really know what's going on with them. So one of the reasons why I think I love this paper is because it's 100% cotton, which makes it really great for absorbing the watercolors and allowing for many layers. Also, there is something really beautiful about the texture that I also really love. I have read a few reviews here and there that some of the sketchbooks ended up having 25% cotton instead of 100%. So I guess that's something to look out for on the label if you do happen to magically come across it in a store. I don't know why there's inconsistencies there. Maybe the company switched up the cotton content. I'm not really sure. But of course, if you do have a sketchbook with 25% cotton paper, it doesn't mean it's going to be bad. It just might not absorb in the same way that this 100% cotton one will. And I recently realized one of the characteristics about this paper that I guess make it kind of polarizing as to why people might love it or hate it. Because a while back, I remember seeing another artist that I follow give it a review, and she actually said she really disliked working with this paper, which I was really surprised by since I absolutely love it. And so I realized the reason why she didn't like it was because the paper stains and absorbs fairly quickly, which means it is very unforgiving if you want to lift the paint off of the paper. I personally don't use lifting techniques when I paint, and so this was something that I never really noticed when I was working with the sketchbook. But then I realized that this very trait of working with this paper is the reason why I love it, because it allows me to scrub and layer without the previous layer of paint budging at all. And so it's kind of a, they have their pros and cons depending on how you personally prefer to paint. And for me, I find that kind of permanence, I guess, it makes putting on smooth, soft blending layers really intuitive for me. So this is kind of a perfect reason why I don't like to necessarily suggest this is the best product for a beginner necessarily, because everyone's preferences and way they like to paint and create is going to be different. But in any case, I do often get a lot of recommendations on watercolor sketchbooks, and since this particular one seems to be very difficult to find at the moment, I would say that my personal preference is a 140-pound cold press watercolor paper. So no matter what the brand is, those are the specs worth keeping an eye out if you're looking for something and you don't really know where to start. And as for brands, Canson and Strathmore are both really great, reliable sketchbook brands. And another one that I personally have not tried but have heard good things about is the Paul Rubens watercolor sketchbook as well. Plus, the cover comes in baby pink, which has made me very, very tempted to buy it. Anyways, moving from talking about the paper, initially when I started the sketching portion of this piece, I was feeling a little bit discouraged because I was having a hard time getting his face right. I wanted to ensure that I captured the subtleties in the features that read both masculine and feminine, since while he is a male character, he is an exceptionally beautiful one. And I joked around on my Instagram stories that Sesshomaru is one of the few male characters that could rival the beauty of Howl from Howl's Moving Castle, who I've painted previously. And similar to the time I drew Howl, this time around, I did kind of put a little bit of pressure on myself to get the face right because I just wanted to do them justice. And as suggested by a mutual artist, she had said that another character who definitely kind of fits this category is also Yue from Cardcaptor Sakura, who I also really want to paint at some point. Maybe not for YouTube though, since I've already talked extensively about this series on my Sakura redraw video. But yeah, after I finished sketching out the face, it ended up being pretty smooth sailing from there with the painting portion. There's something incredibly relaxing doing this particular screen cap redraw. I think maybe because there's mostly light values in this piece, and so I didn't have to spend quite as much time building up the layers on most areas, and I was able to focus most of my time and energy on the face, which, as you may have guessed, is definitely my favorite part of painting a portrait. And something that you may have noticed was that at first I accidentally forgot to include the section of fur that's kind of behind him. Thankfully, I was able to use some of the white watercolor in this set to lighten up the area from where I laid down the initial wash of blue. And which I thought was kind of funny because I often knock palettes for including a white because I usually think that it's kind of useless, but in this case it actually ended up coming in handy, which I was kind of surprised by. So Inuyasha is a series that I was incredibly obsessed with in my early teen years. Here in Canada, it aired every Friday night, kind of in a block of a bunch of anime series, and I was so adamant on making sure I caught every single episode, because back then, if I remember correctly, it was definitely much more difficult to come by online streaming of anime, so if I missed it on TV, there was like no way of being able to watch it otherwise. And so I was dedicated to catching that block of anime shows every Friday. It was to the point that there was a time when I was at a friend's house for like a group sleepover, and I actually ditched them for a couple hours to watch anime in the living room by myself at this person's house because none of my friends in real life had any interest in anime, but I was like, I don't care, I'll be damned if I missed an episode, so see ya. And if you've seen my 15-year art journey video, you'll probably have seen that I did a lot of Inuyasha fan art back in the day. But as I grew older, my obsession with it faded, and of course I moved on to other series and so on. And there are tons of animes and series that I ended up revisiting many times over, like Sailor Moon and Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood. But for some reason, for a very long time, I never bothered to go back to Inuyasha. And I think that I had assumed as an adult I wouldn't find it appealing anymore, and I just assumed that it was something that I was only going to be interested in when I was a teenager. And I worried that if I were to rewatch it again, I would find it really cringy and just sort of like ruin the magic of my memories and nostalgia for it. But then at the beginning of quarantine, I decided to finally get my own Netflix account, and I saw that the first few seasons of Inuyasha were on there, and so I figured, okay, why not watch a few episodes, and you know, I have more free time on my hands. And then, to my surprise and delight, I totally got sucked right back into the lore of the series, and it ended up becoming a nightly ritual of mine where I'd watch a couple episodes in bed before I went to sleep. It was so entertaining and, of course, very nostalgic and just like very comforting, especially during the kind of height of the craziness of the quarantine and pandemic. I mean, it's still happening, of course, but at the time it felt much more scary. And something that I find interesting watching it again now that I'm older is that I actually sympathize with Kagome a lot more than I did when I was a teenager. I remember back then I used to think Kagome was super annoying and that Inuyasha should have just ditched her for Kikyo, but now I look at it and I think, damn, Kagome adapts and handles all the craziness of this demon-filled feudal Japan pretty well, given the fact that she is like a total fish out of water when she's just like dropped there. And I actually realized she's actually like very tenacious, and given the fact that she's never used a bow and arrow before, you gotta give her props for just adapting and kind of just going with the flow with this crazy thing that she's put into. And something, though, I gotta say as an adult that I can't get over, that I totally glossed over as a teenager, is the thought of, why the hell does she keep wearing her school uniform when she goes to feudal Japan? There are so many cases where she brings back practical things like medical supplies and instant food, and she brings a bike, and yet doesn't think to wear, I don't know, pants and maybe some more durable shoes or boots or something. She knows she's going to be adventuring and fighting demons. Personally, I definitely would have dressed more appropriately, full mountain gear or something. And, even if she didn't want to wear that kind of stuff all the time, she could just have her school uniform to change into and out of for whatever occasion, kind of like Sango does. That girl knows what's up. And then, going back to the Kagome, Kikyo, Inuyasha dynamic, because, this wouldn't be a real discussion of the series if I didn't talk about that. I found Inuyasha actually to be the most infuriating between the three of them in this case. He really be stringing both of these girls along with no end in sight. I could not believe how long he pines over Kikyo. Like, dude, she is an entirely different person from when you knew her originally. Plus, she's dead, so, maybe you should kind of let her go now. But, of course, Kagome is also at fault for putting up with this dynamic for so long as well, knowing full well that he's still not over Kikyo, and then Kikyo's over here trying to kill Kagome. The whole drama of it. Love triangles are obviously very cliche, but I still eat it up every single time. I freaking love it. But yeah, I remember, jokingly, there was just so many cases where I thought, Kagome, girl, just go with Koga. He's gonna treat you like a queen. You don't have anyone to compete with. He is in love with you, hands down. Which, by the way, for those of you who have seen my 6 fan arts video where I drew Koga, you might already know that Koga, along with Sesshomaru, are actually my favorite characters from Inuyasha, which I find to be pretty funny since they are very, very different characters from one another. And of course, while I definitely get that the dynamic between Koga and Kagome was totally one-sided on his part, I still found something about how open-minded and direct he was with her just very endearing. He was incredibly stubborn when it came to literally anything else, but as soon as he meets Kagome, he's suddenly like, all right, we don't harm humans anymore, or here, I've picked you some flowers because girls like that sort of thing, right? Come on. How could you not find those things incredibly endearing and kind of sweet? Especially when it's in contrast with Inuyasha, who is not direct at all when it comes to his feelings and emotions. And so I think that's just like a fun contrast between the two characters who otherwise are very, very similar. And of course, don't get me wrong, I actually do love Inuyasha too. Every time he was in modern day Japan with Kagome were surprisingly some of my favorite Inuyasha Kagome moments. I always loved how unfazed he was by most modern things, and how every time he's over at Kagome's house, he's always playing with their cat and like low-key tormenting it, which I actually just thought was the cutest thing ever. It kind of allows us to see a side of Inuyasha where he's just genuinely relaxed and not on the edge of his seat ready to fight at any given moment. And you kind of see little bits of his personality coming through that's not, you know, crowded with that kind of mentality. Plus, I just love the way they animated that cat. It was so cute and hilarious. Oh, and of course, don't worry, I have not forgotten about our dear Sesshomaru here. He's so cold and has such little dialogue, and yet we all adore him anyways. I guess with stoic, strong characters like this, it makes us more keen to see what they do, and whenever they do anything that's slightly out of character, it carries so much more meaning and weight to it, like with Sesshomaru taking in Rin, for example. But at the very least, he's definitely got a killer character design and is way more fabulous than I could ever hope to be. I have been told that he has way more dialogue in the very final season of Inuyasha, which I actually have never seen before, but plan to watch very soon. I basically know how everything concludes, but I am curious to see it all play out. Plus, I just loved seeing any kind of interactions between Sesshomaru and the other characters. Like, I remember being on the edge of my seat when Koga and Sesshomaru crossed paths in that one episode, since you'd think that they would totally clash. Plus, my two faves, of course. But I thought it was interesting that they chose to make it pretty anticlimactic, since, you know, you would think that those two kinds of personalities would go head to head. And I always thought it would have been fun if there was like a mini side arc or episode where Koga and Sesshomaru banded together to bully Inuyasha. Can you imagine? That would have been so funny. Also, how do we feel about this new Inuyasha revival? I personally am not really keen on this whole Baruto trend. I have no investment in these characters' children, and it always makes me kind of depressed at the thought of seeing these characters I loved become just like parental background characters. But obviously the biggest question that arose when news was initially being shown of these new characters, who, if you don't know, are the children of Inuyasha and Sesshomaru, not together of course. But the question was, who was bestowed the absolute honor of banging Sesshomaru? I want to know. Anyways, I'll leave you with that. I hope you had fun. Let me know all of your Inuyasha thoughts in the comments down below, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!